If you've been around for the past couple of decades, you may have noticed that temperatures around the globe have gotten significantly hotter. And while this phenomenon may be very pleasurable to some, it's really not good for the planet. Global warming is what we're discussing on today's Angel Dodger.
I spent my life pushing myself to be the strongest, and now I learn there's a power level I'll never reach on my own. And I hate that.
In today's episode, I'm joined with Jason Schwartz of Greenpeace. Thank you for joining me today. Can you provide me with some more information as to what your organization does as it pertains to global warming?
Yeah, sure. Well, my organization is a pretty large international organization with national and regional offices in dozens of countries. And so everywhere we work, global warming or climate change, however you want to refer to it, looks a little bit different. I apologize for the noise. There's some construction happening outside. And so in each of those countries or in each of those regions, there's something else that's being done. As far as Greenpeace United States goes, which is the organization that I work for, we have a pretty broad portfolio of work that we do on climate. We have traditionally focused a lot of our energy around around extraction. So fossil fuel extraction, whether that's coal. We have a pretty large coal program in which we're trying to sort of push back against coal extraction or coal exports to other countries or coal-fired power plants. And then we have other work that's focusing on oil extraction, largely oil extraction offshore. So Gulf of Mexico, Alaska. We work with communities on the ground in those areas, trying to support their work against offshore drilling in their areas. And then we also have just a kind of a lot of work that we do in coalitions with other organizations. The climate movement is pretty large, and it looks like big national groups. It also looks like small local community groups fighting in every way they can. And so we just try to support in whatever way Greenpeace can add value, whether that's providing research support, providing support for nonviolent direct action, providing campaigning support or organizing or media and communications support. We just try to help out wherever we can. It's a big fight. There are lots of people fighting it. As a national group, we have resources to support communities where we're able to.
Okay, so how has global warming affected our planet in recent history?
Well, I mean, that's still very much an open question because we're in the midst of it affecting our planet. Certainly, we've seen coastal communities being deeply affected by rising sea levels. You also see more severe storms, and so we've had an uptick in catastrophic storms, and so a lot of people try to pin that on coincidence or other forces, but it's quite possible that global warming is related to that. We've also had extreme weather conditions like heat waves and droughts that have, certainly in the United States, we've seen an uptick in that in the last 15 or 20 years. The Arctic, which has traditionally been unpassable by ships, that has been especially in the wintertime, but also even in the summer, where there's been pretty much a constant year-long ice sheet, that has begun to sort of dissipate. So you see the Arctic being threatened, and the Arctic is a place where a lot of global conditions are maintained, oceanic but also atmospheric conditions. And so as that starts to go, you start possibly seeing feedback effects that drive weather conditions even further. I think you've seen a lot of changes to weather. More than that, though, I think that you've seen a lot of, or not more than that, but more troublingly, I guess, you've seen a lot of effects to social conditions. As droughts increase, humans' ability to produce food or to have access to drinking water is reduced, and that you've seen in a lot of vulnerable countries. As places become less and less inhabitable because of rising seawater, you see more and more migration. And so a lot of issues around how do people adapt to a change in climate that's the kind of stuff you're seeing now, where you're seeing certain conflicts being driven by that. You're seeing migration being driven by climate change, and potentially even you're seeing increases in diseases, whether they be waterborne diseases or mosquito vector-borne diseases, or other sort of insect-borne diseases. Those kinds of things are increasing as well. So you're seeing those kinds of effects on people. You're also seeing effects all over the world in ecosystems. The oceans are warming, and as they warm, they acidify. That acidification makes it less and less possible for things like coral or mollusks to live in the ocean, and those are at the very base of the food chain. And so that makes it, as the base erodes of the food chain, then the entire web starts to disintegrate. Or you've seen forests also be affected by climate change. For instance, in the United States, certain insects that prey on trees, they're surviving in greater numbers through warmer winters, and so they're devastating western forests in this country. So there's just like a myriad of all kinds of ways where changing a climate by a little bit here and there really, really affects most of the Earth systems, whether they be social or environmental.
So what was the root cause of it? Was it one issue? Was it many different issues?
By this, you mean climate change?
Yes.
Yeah, well, I mean, the primary cause is the emission of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere by industrial activity. So the global warming, climate change, whatever you want to call it, is caused by certain heat-trapping gases keeping warmth that would normally escape into the upper reaches of the atmosphere down here around us, sort of enveloping us in warmth. The primary greenhouse gas right now is carbon dioxide, and that is the primary emission from the burning of fossil fuels. So, in the last 150 years since the Industrial Revolution, people have been emitting exponentially more and more and more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So, I mean, the uptick in warmth and the uptick in emissions of carbon dioxide has been traced by, a vast majority, 99% of scientists studying the issue. So we pretty much know that it's human industrial activity that's driving it.
So are certain parts of the globe more affected by global warming than others?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly places that are already hotter, like equatorial regions, are feeling the brunt of some of that heat, right? I mean, places that are already drought prone, places that are near coastlines, those are the places that are already vulnerable and seeing changes. I mean, and of course the Arctic and Antarctic are also very vulnerable, because very, very small margins of change in those areas can really, really abruptly melt sea ice. And once that sea ice starts melting, you have feedback loops that make it even melt faster. So polar regions and then regions around the equator are seeing sort of the most rapid changes, but it's happening everywhere, really. I mean, it's sort of vulnerability looks different everywhere you go. Like vulnerability to climate change looks like depleting groundwater in certain places, for instance, without that groundwater being recharged. In other places, it looks like I said, beetle infestation and severe forest fires. So it's
Everywhere.
Are there specific regions? I mean, it's hard to say. It's really affecting every region in different ways. Yeah.
So what can we do to stop climate change?
There's a lot that we can do. The first, and I think the primary one, is that we have to demand that our leaders and the industries that they respond to are being more conscientious about our future. You can buy a Prius, or you can change to a more energy efficient light bulb, all this stuff, but changes at the individual level, though important and though meaningful, are small compared to changes at the structural level. And so we have to push our governments and our leaders to be brave enough and ambitious enough to make those kinds of structural changes. That's one thing that we can do is engage in the political process to push our leaders. Unfortunately, our options in the political sphere are limited, right? Like you vote, or you do this, or and that feels sort of hard for people to accept too. So I think one of the things that you can also do is, take this issue seriously and be brave, be courageous, join the movement. There's a movement around climate change developing all over the world. And if this issue feels really important to you, then clicking on a Facebook link or voting might not be enough. You may have to engage in that great American pastime of nonviolent direct action and civil disobedience to push our leaders to be more responsive and responsible to the future. So I think being a bit braver than people normally are, going outside your comfort zone, taking to the street, being part of a political movement is an important aspect too. I think also, we have to be better at talking about it. Educate yourself like you're doing, and helping people have a sense for how to speak about it and how to think about it and how to push issues about climate change to their friends and family who might not already be dealing with it. So I think it's really important to just remember that it's always an issue, it's going to be increasingly an issue, and it's an issue that is bound to so many other issues like inequality or racism, because it's usually the most vulnerable populations in countries or in areas that are the ones who are bearing the brunt of climate change's impacts. So remembering that it's an issue that's connected to so many others is also really important. I just think that, for so long we've focused on what people can do in the marketplace, what people can do in their homes, but that hasn't worked. We're still here. It's just climate change is only getting worse. We have to start treating it with the urgency that it deserves, and people have to be a bit more courageous and take more chances with how they're responding to it.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, you can check out my most recent episode over here, which discusses how I get these interviews and the stress that I have to deal with. If you like this episode or any of my other episodes, you can also just go ahead and subscribe. Or not.